Now in the good old days, the Japanese Grand Prix was usually the setting for a title showdown, something that you'd have to wait quite a bit of time for between, the Japanese Grand Prix and the race preceding it. Now these days the Japanese Grand Prix is in the final 3/4 of the season, which it doesn't feel right anymore. Wow, maybe I am getting old. And in those so-called good old days, I saw 3 showdowns in 5 years at the Japanese Grand Prix. Hill versus Villeneuve in 1996, Hakkinen versus Schumacher in 1998, and Hakkinen versus Irvine in 1999. I guess you could include 2000 in there as well, even though it wasn't the final race, but Hakkinen and Schumacher were still fighting at that point. And then there's obviously 1997, which had the final race at Jerez. But still, Suzuka remains a fan favourite and a favourite of the drivers, and even though it is quite difficult to overtake here, the drivers still seem to love it, and usually there's very little overtaking involved. But for the 2005 edition of the Japanese Grand Prix, we did get a lot of overtaking, because there was a last to first challenge going on. Fernando Alonso had taken the title at the previous round in Brazil, but Renault and McLaren were still with a chance of taking the Constructors' title, and McLaren would have to pull out all the stops to beat Renault after a bizarre qualifying session. The rules were actually changed after a few races, but the original format was an aggregate timing session set by finding the aggregate of 2 one-shot qualifying sessions, with each car having the track to itself, almost like turning on private qualifying mode in rFactor 2. After just one race, the audiences decided they hated it, and the FIA listened, reverting to a session where each car got 1 flying lap on the Saturday, where the cars qualified on race fuel because reasons. It was just too confusing for everybody really, and having the cars do their low fuel runs on the Saturday with the high fuel runs on the Sunday morning was just not something people wanted to see. The one-shot format in general was just dying. The order for this qualifying session was decided on the finishing position from the previous race, so the driver that won the race went last when the track was at its most saturated, in terms of rubber, while the driver that came last went first. Now it should have probably been the other way around to balance the field and maybe have some of the slower cars qualifying a tiny bit higher up to force more overtaking by the faster cars, but that's just a case of improving the show. Something they've gone too far with. I know I say that every time, but this time. It also meant that teams like Jordan and Minardi down the back of the field would get some TV time as well. So due to the rules, Montoya would be the last man on track. Before Montoya would be Raikkonen, Alonso and the Michael. The rest of the order was Fisichella, Barrichello, Button, Ralph, Klein, Sato, Massa, Villeneuve, Trulli, Albers the Fifth Musketeer, Karthikeyan, Montero, Webber, Dornbos, Pitsonia and Coulthard would be the first driver out on track. But because of the time of the year that this race is held, things got a little bit iffy in the old weather department, so this qualifying session was a bit wet, and it only got worse. You can see here the times get progressively slower, and normally the cars that went last had the advantage. But right down the bottom of the table you have Schumacher in 14th, 6 seconds off the pole time set by his brother, who in turn just beat out Button. Then you've got Alonso 16th, Raikkonen 17th, and Montoya 18th. And Montoya didn't even set a time because it was just too wet at the point he went out. The 2005 Japanese Grand Prix looked set to be a cracker, with Fisichella probably now the favourite to take the win given his Renault was far better than the BAR of Button and the Toyota of Schumacher, and Fizzy only being just under 2/10 off the front of the grid. I still maintain that Fisichella is one of the best mid-car drivers ever. Schumacher led off the line, but all eyes were at the back to see what the likes of Michael, Raikkonen, Montoya and Alonso could pull off right from the back. Like Schumacher had done in 1998, Raikkonen bolted off the line and had cleared the 2 Minardis instantly. He also cleared Massa Saub around the outside and picked up a couple more freebies when Sato got swiped by Barrichello and both ran wide into the gravel trap, meaning that he was up to 12th by the first corner. Montoya then squeezed his way through to put him down to 13th, while Alonso was making more headway and was up to 7th by the end of the first lap. But Montoya's charge was ended when, at the final corner, he tried to overtake Villeneuve-Sauber around the outside of that fast right-hander that leads onto the pit straight, and the 1995 kart champion forced the 1999 kart champion a little bit too wide onto the gravel, and then straight into the wall. This brought out the safety car, and also dented McLaren's title hopes. On lap 10, Raikkonen was promoted into the top 10 when Pitsonia stuck his Williams into the gravel at Degner 2, probably due to a lack of grip on the dry track since the track hadn't been able to rubber in properly after the downpour the previous day. On that same lap, Trulli's Toyota was tipped out of the race by Satai's BAR, and Ralph pitted not long after, running a 3-stop strategy which put Fisichella into the lead. By lap 15, Raikkonen was into the points, grabbing 8th off Christian Klein in the Red Bull. Then on lap 19, Alonso pulled off what is probably one of the most spectacular overtakes I've ever seen while watching Formula 1. And this is the point where he did Schumacher around the outside of the 130R. Now the 130R had, funnily enough, been reprofiled for this year. It's called the 130R because it has a 130 metre radius. Well, had a 130 metre radius. But it was a corner that was on borrowed time as there had been a couple of serious shunts there, one of them involving Alan McNish, who ended up on the other side of the fence. Prior to 2005 it was a standard continuous radius corner, but from 2005 onwards they changed it, so the initial corner is tighter, forming an 85 metre radius, then opens out into a 340 metre radius. This then means the run to the final chicane is closer. When Alonso did Schumacher around the outside of the 130R, Raikkonen was next in line and he was trying every which way to get past the Ferrari, but because Raikkonen and Schumacher were on sort of similar fuel loads, it was very difficult for the McLaren to pass, even with the pace advantage. They both pitted at the same time on lap 24 and they left as they came in, but crucially both of them got ahead of Alonso. And it's weird watching this race back and the highlights of this race back and seeing these pit stops with fuels just going in and they're not even touching the tyres, because this was the year of the no tyre change rule. And it wasn't just Alonso that was sweeping around the outside of Ferraris, because Raikkonen did the same move at turn 1 to get up another position on lap 28, and Alonso repeated that same move on Schumacher at turn 1, given that due to the no tyre change rule, Schumacher's Bridgestones were not in as good condition as the Michelins in the latter stages of a race. Michelin was able to balance durability and pace, while Bridgestone couldn't. With Fisichella up front and Alonso and Raikkonen having to come through, it looked like Fizzy would have a dominant run to the end of the race to take his second win of the season. But after the Italian's last stop, Raikkonen had taken the lead. When Raikkonen made his final stop, he emerged 9 seconds behind Fizzy instead of 20. Alonso was having to carve his way through past Button and Webber to get back into the podium spots, due to Renault pitting before McLaren and Raikkonen putting in the laps when he needed to. Raikkonen continued to put the pressure on Fisichella, and while lapping traffic, Fizzy lost his concentration and that allowed Kimi to close right up. Down the pit straight with about 3 laps remaining, Raikkonen got into the slipstream and then did to Fisichella what he'd done to Schumacher. Swept it round the outside of turn 1. Kimi had managed to get into the lead and that's how it stayed. Raikkonen won the race from Fisichella while Alonso took the final podium spot, which put Renault into the Constructors' Championship lead by just 2 points. Webber was an impressive yet anonymous 4th in the Williams, while Schumacher could only muster 7th, but he was still the first of the Bridgestone runners. This race is usually at the top of the list when it comes to KIMI'S best drives. Pretty much last to first, driving like the championship was on the line even though Alonso had already taken it in the previous race. It also shows what could have been, with the McLaren MP420 being an absolute weapon of a car, but not having the reliability when it mattered. Issues took Raikkonen out of 3 race-winning positions, which cost Kimi and McLaren the Constructors' Championship, despite McLaren winning 2 more races than Renault in that season. Again, a season of what-ifs. So then, a look at Kimi's comeback drive in the 2005 Japanese Grand Prix. If this has got your nostalgia senses tingling, then do give the video a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this, then you know what to do. Subscribe, bell, all that good stuff. Massive thanks to the people who support this channel through Patreon, and if you want to help out with the purchasing of the images that you do see in these videos, you can help out by heading to the link in the description, where there'll also be links to Discord and also to my socials. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.